The last thing you want to hear when you need your auto insurance most is a robot with countless irrelevant menu options. Which is why with USAA Auto Insurance, you'll get great service that is easy and reliable, all at the touch of a button. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply.
USAA.
This episode is brought to you by Walmart. New beauty is in bloom at Walmart, and it's all about springtime radiance. From Drybar, Tula Skincare, and hundreds more available online, Walmart has the premium brands you want and this season's on-trend products for flawless, glossy hair and hydrated skin. Big name beauty brands? Check. The things you love? Check. Find trending spring beauty and all you need to look and feel gorgeous at Walmart, on app and online.
Hello and welcome to The Shift, the podcast that aims to tell the no-holds-barred truth about being a woman post-40. Created and hosted by me, journalist and author Sam Baker. Would you credit it? There's an award-winning novelist in my box room. Maggie O'Farrell is the author of 8 novels, most recently the stunning Women's Prize winner Hamnet, and one of my favourite memoirs of all time, I Am. And now she's written a children's book, Where Snow Angels Go, which is a banker for a Christmas Day teatime animation in the style of the Snowman, if ever I saw one.
I've always found it quite hard to find stories that build resilience, stories that challenge you for that age group. So I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll just try and write one.
While Maggie noses through my bookcase and plays with Sausage the cat, we talk being a social media refusenik, giving voice to women's stories, saying good riddance to the male gaze, why she never thought she was the marrying kind, and why she still secretly thinks someone might take away her Women's Prize. I'm in my box room with Maggie O'Farrell. Maggie, welcome to the box room.
It's a really nice box room. I wouldn't describe it as a box room at all.
It's got windows.
It has, lots of windows, loads of books, nice rug, it's lovely.
When we moved up here, the other house that we were bidding on that we didn't get, it would have really been a box room. It was literally, It was only good for recording podcasts and nothing else.
The podcast room, rename it.
It would have literally been a podcast room. Anyway, Maggie, congratulations on winning the Women's Prize.
Thank you very much. It still hasn't quite sunk in, but yeah, it's lovely. It's a really nice thing.
Did you think it was possible?
No, really didn't actually. I mean, I was so, I don't know, being on the shortlist seemed, so thrilling, and it was an amazing shortlist this year. Really,
brilliant shortlist. So
many, fantastic novels, and also ones that I had never come across before. So I'd never read Angie Cruz, that Dominicana, and which I absolutely loved. I was really blown away by it because I'm a big fan of Junot Diaz, who writes so brilliantly about the Dominican Republic. But then to get this kind of female perspective in Dominicana was so intriguing. And I'm a huge fan of Jenny Offill, and I loved Department of Speculation. I think I've read it 3 times, so I was thrilled. So it just felt like this amazing kind of gang that I was in. It was one of my big joys of lockdown, actually, rereading, the Mantel and the Evaristo, and then, reading these new books that I hadn't come across, and Natalie Haynes and Jenny Offill, and so. But it seemed like enough actually to be on the shortlist. That felt like enough of a gift, really. So no, I was actually totally shocked. I never, at a very kind of deep cellular level, I really never expected it at all. So it hasn't quite sunk in. And as I was saying to you earlier, that the kind of setup this year, the sort of digital Zoom calls, it does sort of feed into the paranoia that it might all be a bit of a prank somehow.
Yeah, imposter syndrome. You've just won the Women's Prize and you've still got imposter syndrome.
Yeah. I do have the Bessie statue now on my windowsill, and that every time I feel the imposter syndrome, I have a look at her, and she's very beautiful.
Do you suffer from imposter syndrome as a rule?
Well, it's funny, I don't know if I would call it that, but I think possibly actually. I do remember being at university and thinking for probably the first 2 or 3 terms, somebody's going to come and knock on my door and say, actually, sorry, there's been a mistake, you really have to go. You didn't really think you could come here, did you? So I think possibly, but actually I think things like the Women's Prize, it's so, it's such a once in a lifetime astonishing thing to happen to you. And I think you have to kind of enjoy it. You've got to feel it, and you've got to enjoy it for maybe a couple of days, maybe a week, and then you have to kind of put it away. You've just got to keep on making good work. I think it's part, I never read my reviews. That's another sort of part of the same thing. Yeah, I really avoid it, even if they're really nice. So my husband, he provides a really good service. He reads them and he says it was really bad, it was pretty good, it was all right, or it was a really good one. I never read them just because I think it's bad for you to see yourself from the outside, in a sense, if you're trying to write. You know, you need to write the kind of story that you can't not write, the book that you can't not write, and that's always going to be your best book. You know, I think if you're trying to second guess what people might want or a reader might want, I think it's bad to sort of feel yourself, explain to yourself, to have that self-consciousness about you. If you read a review, there might be one line, you know, that her concerns are this, or her novel is about this, or the themes that she writes about. You're going to hear that in the back of your head when you're writing, and I think you don't need to hear it. You need to write in a bubble, or I do anyway.
Is that one of the reasons you stay off social media?
It's quite complicated because I think a lot of it's to do with time. You know, I really need to write in many different ways, and I also have 3 kids, and, you know, life is busy, and the internet and social media is very chronophagic. It is going to suck you in.
I've never heard that word before, but I like it.
It's a good word, isn't it? It's a good word.
Chronophasic or chronophagic?
Phagic, steals your time. Yeah, chronophagic. Yeah. You know, I do have a smartphone now. I've had one for, I think, 2 years now, and I sort of hate it. You know, I think we all have to ask ourselves questions about it. We have to ask ourselves why we need it and why we are constantly, you know, reaching for it. Do we want it to alter our behaviour? Do we want it to alter our relationships with other people? You know, we have to always remember that these apps and, you know, software are designed by really clever people who are setting out to exploit the weaknesses in human psychology. And I would never say to someone, don't use it, and I wouldn't look down on anybody for using it. But I think we have to ask questions about it and ask ourselves questions about our relationship with it.
It seems to me like all of it is about you avoiding external influence on your decisions or your...
Possibly, yeah.
Which I really admire.
I mean, I wouldn't say influence, because obviously I'm hugely influenced by people around me and the books I read and the films I watch and the music I listen to, and I think you have to pick your influences, I think, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, I use the internet, and there's a lot on it which I find incredibly useful. You know, it's incredibly useful in articles that I read, and I suppose what I feel for myself is that I have to be careful and I have to be choosy, because I know it's addictive. You know, there's no coincidence
it really
that
is, yeah.
people are called users. There's only one other department of life, or section of life, where people are described as users, and that's drugs and alcohol, isn't it?
That's true. I never thought of it like that.
So I think, I mean, it is addictive. You know, I see it in my children. I worry about this generation, because they have no immunity to the kind of siren song of the internet and, you know,
they were born to it, weren't they?
You know, when you're young, I think, especially teenagers, they have no sense of how to regulate themselves with it, and I find that very concerning for our children. Hopefully, the best way you can give your kids a good example. If they see you with your phone and your tablet in your hand, then they're going to want one too, aren't they?
So do they see Will with his phone and you without, and then they have to choose?
I guess so.
Were you always so self-contained? No, seriously. Okay, so from outside, for the listeners, Maggie's looking horrified that I just said that.
Not horrified, just a bit laughing. Well, that's not how I think of myself.
From outside, you seem very self-contained, but from inside, you're like, what?
I don't think, well, it's not really, no, I've never thought of myself like that. I think I've always been quite independent. I think when you're a child, you're described as headstrong, aren't you?
Yes,
Or difficult. Yeah, I suppose, I mean, I don't know, there's all kinds of words you could use for it, aren't you? But I suppose I've always been quite independent. I always knew I wanted kids, but I remember saying this to Will, that I was really surprised. I never really imagined that I'd be married or in that kind of a sort of married relationship. I never pictured that as a future for me. I knew that I would have love affairs. I knew I'd have men coming in and out of my life. I never thought I would be settled in a kind of, you know, codependent relationship, as I have been for 20 years now. So that's.
And how did Will feel about that?
I think he's quite used to. He knows me quite well.
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh well, bad luck." There you are.
Exactly. I mean, there is so much to talk about with Hamnet, and you've talked about most of it already anyway, motherhood and grief and all that. But one of the things that I love most about it is the way that you reclaim Agnes. Is that how you pronounce it?
I actually call it Agnes in myself, just because it's quite tricky. I think in those it would have been pronounced Agnes or Agnes, a bit like the French, but.
It's when I was reading it, I kept trying to pronounce it in my head and couldn't work it out. But
I
the
know,
way
when I was
that
writing it, I just always referred to her internally as Agnes. Yeah, it's just easier.
The kind of reclamation, if you like, of her story, her narrative, and her rehabilitation. Did you intend to rehabilitate her?
No, I didn't think of it in those terms, but I think I just wanted to give her a narrative of her own, actually. I feel she's somebody, Shakespeare himself is he's such a mysterious figure. We have all this output of his work, but actually he left a really, really scant paper trail for himself. He didn't even make sure that his plays were published before he died, and he could have done. He had quite a long retirement back in Stratford-upon-Avon. I don't know what else he was doing, but that fascinates me about him. But there's not a huge amount of documentation about him, the person he was, and what he was doing. And there's massive gaps in his story. But at the same time, if we think there's not much about him, we know almost nothing about her. Nothing at all. We don't even have a record of her birth, because she was born before parish records began. And we know that she got married, and we know she had 3 children, and we know when she died, and that's pretty much it, really. But this lack of information hasn't stopped historians and scholars and biographers and screenplay writers and other novelists from rushing forward to fill this sort of void with just hatred, actually, and vilification and misogyny. And we've always been fed this narrative about her, that she's this kind of ageing peasant strumpet who tricked this genius into marriage. He hated her, and he had to run away to London to get away from her, and he regretted this marriage. And they base it on pretty much nothing. They constantly will evoke, the famous second best bed behest in his will. But, if you actually look at, an image of his will, that second best bed is an interlineation. So it's squeezed in between 2 other lines. And the will itself is a really dry document. It doesn't seem to have been written in the voice of somebody who has possibly written the greatest love poetry and scenes ever. And yes, there's no affection really showed for his wife in the will, but there's no affection shown for anybody else, actually. It
was a will, though.
It's a will. Yeah, he was dying. He was very clearly, possibly of typhoid. So, there's no nice death, but typhoid is particularly not a nice death. And I just got so frustrated by this, and so, revolted by all this kind of hatred for her, that I just decided that I wanted to tell a new story. And so one of the things I was looking at the document of her father's will. So he died, Richard Hathaway died a year before she married William, and in it he leaves her a very generous dowry, and he refers to her as my daughter Agnes. And I thought, what on earth is that? Have we been calling her by the wrong name on top of everything else for almost half a century? And surely if anyone knows her real name, it's
her father.
Going to be her father. Yeah. So that was a real kind of gift, in a sense, but it was a real kind of lightning bolt moment where I thought, maybe she's nothing like the person that she's always represented as. There's one tiny shred of documentation that shows that she ran a really successful malting business later in life. So I don't know, none of it feeds into this idea that she is this woman sitting pining bitterly back in Stratford.
No.
When William Shakespeare retired, he was the equivalent of a multi-millionaire. He was an incredibly successful businessman, as well as being a pretty good playwright,
Good enough.
But he chose to live in really modest lodgings in London, and he sent all his money back to Stratford. So in Stratford he bought his wife and daughters an enormous mansion of a house the year after Hamnet died. Huge place. And he also bought fields and cottages, and he leased them out, so he was obviously a very successful landlord in Stratford. I often wonder if that's how he was seen at the time, just as a landlord.
Yeah.
But also at the end of his career, he could have chosen to live anywhere, but he chose to go back to Stratford and to live with his wife, which again doesn't speak of somebody who hated his wife and regretted his marriage, does it?
No, if he hated her, wouldn't he have got a nice house in London? And
he could have done that easily, set himself up, had a whole other life. I know you have to be very careful not to read too much into his life in the plays and vice versa, but there are so many instances of very constant, faithful, devoted wives. Intelligent wives as well. There's a whole lot made about her being illiterate. Was she illiterate, and how terrible it is that he married this illiterate woman, which is so... It's just missing the point, because of course she probably was illiterate. But what kind of daughter of a sheep farmer would have been taught to read in the 16th century? It's obvious to me that illiteracy doesn't necessarily mean stupidity, does it?
There's so much in keeping, though, isn't it, with the way that women have been written about and spoken about, if they're spoken about at all. Men are geniuses and the women are at best a muse.
Yeah, exactly.
Sidelined.
Or just having the babies of the genius. Yeah.
Yeah, and the story kind of, and that's one of the things that interests me in my book, is that the way the story stops, even now, at motherhood.
Yes, it's true.
For women.
What amazes me on that subject, actually, about the whole Shakespeare story, there's obviously a reason why his biographers and scholarship focuses on his career in London, and his domestic family life back in Stratford has been sort of elided over. But about the time, so both his daughters, Judith and Susanna, both lived really long time. Judith was actually in her early 70s when she died, which is astonishing. Yeah, and of course that was about the time that Shakespeare's reputation was re-emerging and people were starting to write biographies of him and to put on his plays again. But not one of the people ever thought to go to Stratford to ask his daughters about him.
Which would not have been the case if he'd had a son.
And you think, but what has been lost from that? If any of them had decided just to take a trip to Stratford where his daughters were living, they were married and they had their own children, but nobody did. So that incredible cache and possibility of knowledge about him as a man was gone forever.
It's really insane when you think about it, isn't it?
Yeah, it's terrible.
It's like just that short distance away were people who could have told you everything about him.
Everything about him. And think what we would know today about him, which we don't know because of that.
I mean, you do always write women's stories. Is that intentional?
Well, not really. I mean, Hamnet's a boy.
Yeah.
As if like that.
Yeah, but the women are very much front and centre, aren't they?
I suppose so. I mean, I suppose with this book, I didn't certainly set out to write a women's story. I mean, and Shakespeare himself, he's a more sort of marginalised character in this, but that's because he is who he is, and he wasn't there. He was in London working for a lot of the time. I'm sure he did come back. But, and I think I've always felt that Hamnet, the boy, has been completely overlooked. He isn't well known enough. And I think nobody has ever really given the significance he deserves. The fact that without him or without him dying, we wouldn't have the play Hamlet. We probably wouldn't have Twelfth Night, which is about boy and girl twins who are separated and they each think the other is dead, and then they're magically reunited at the end. I know, but
and having now just finished Hamlet again, just like
I know. The really amazing thing, I remember I was looking at a playbill for Twelfth Night and I realised that the opening night at the Globe Theatre was on what would have been the twins' birthday.
How interesting.
Yeah, and of course Shakespeare himself, I'm sure, would have chosen that date.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
As a bit of a Maggie bore, I've been looking at the way that your works kind of run and how it's really interesting to me that you wrote Hamnet after you wrote the memoir. Do you think you could have written Hamnet if you hadn't written quite an exposing memoir?
I don't know. I mean, it's funny. I certainly wanted to write Hamnet for quite a while, and I did have a couple of shots at it. I think actually I've written 3 books instead of writing Hamnet. I kind of swerved away from it. And I did do a bit more research and I thought about it, and I did actually start writing. So I did have, I remember sort of giving myself a talking to and saying, you've either just got to do it or you've just got to forget about it. You can't keep circling around. You can't have these ever-growing line of books on your shelf, Shakespeare and life in the 16th century. You just got to do it or forget about it. Now or never. And so I did have a look at the document, and I'd written about 20,000 words, and I read it and I realised it was all wrong. And I started it in the wrong sort of, if you imagine one of the first decisions you've got to make with a story is that, if you imagine your kind of novel as a chronological line, you've got to decide at what point you're going to jump in. Do you jump near the end and then come back to the beginning, or do you start in the beginning and work chronologically and all that stuff? And I'd started totally at the wrong place, so I just kind of ditched that and started again. But I don't know, I mean, it's funny, I think all your books, all the books that you write are sort of reactions to their predecessor, possibly. But again, it's one of those things that I don't ever analyse too much. I try not to think about it actually, because I think if you try and plot your working, there's a kind of line. I'm sure there is, but I avoid thinking about it.
It's the kind of thing you get from students and annoying interviewers who say, it's about the importance of the ferocity of motherhood in the works of Maggie O'Farrell, isn't it? It's like
possibly. No, not annoying. I think it's just, I suppose it goes back to what I was saying, you've always got to write the book you can't not write. The one that's sort of knocking on the door insistently saying, pay attention to me now.
And so children's book next. Where did that come from?
Yeah, that was a bit from left field. Well, actually, it was from, I sort of made up a story for my own kids. And it was one that I told them sort of verbally. And then I did go on, it was when I was on a book tour. I can't remember what, it was either for the memoir or the one before. It might have been for that, I can't remember exactly. And I was writing them a letter a day because I was away for quite a while. So I wrote a letter and I put it in the post box every day so they would get something through the door. And so I was writing them this story about snow angels every bit a day. And then when I got back home, my youngest said to me, she was actually falling off to sleep. She said, "Will you read the whole thing to me, start to finish?" And so I did. And then she said, "I really want to see pictures for this. I really want to see the pictures. It needs to be a proper book that I can hold in my hands." Oh. I know. It was so sweet. And I walked away and I was thinking, well, maybe it could be. Maybe it could. The thing is, I'd never ever written for children at all. Just because you've written, however many novels, it doesn't mean you can just do that. It doesn't mean you can change course. It's a really specific skill of writing for children, and it's not something you can just pick up, and it's not a hobby.
No.
It's very, very particular. So I didn't know if it was possible. And actually the other thing, my other daughter was standing behind one day, and I think I had a bit of Hamnet up on screen. I don't know what I was doing. I was either writing it or editing it, and she was reading it over my shoulder, and she said, I don't like this book. It's too sad. She said, you've got to write something happy next time.
Oh, how old is she?
At the time, she was probably 10, I think.
Traumatised by
No, but she wasn't reading any of the really terrible, the really, really grim scenes, but it was obviously sad. No, I can't remember which bit it was. But so I said to her, okay, I'll write something happy. So that's why I decided to write Snow Angels.
It's absolutely lovely. This episode of The Shift is sponsored by Shopify. Is it just me, or does it seem like everyone is either starting a side hustle or becoming their own boss? And you know what they're hearing a lot? It's the sound of another sale on Shopify, the all-in-one commerce platform to start, run, and grow your own business. Shopify is the commerce platform revolutionizing millions of businesses, big and small, worldwide. Whether you're selling jeans or juice, books or blusher, Shopify simplifies selling online and in person. Covers all your sales channels from a shop-front-ready POS system to its all-in-one e-commerce platform. It even helps you sell across social media like Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And it's full of industry-leading tools that give you complete control without having to learn new skills like design or coding. And thanks to award-winning help and with an extensive business course library, Shopify is ready to support your success every step of the way. What's lovely about Shopify is that no matter how big you want to grow, Shopify will be there to empower you with confidence and control to take your business to the next level. It's time to get serious about selling and get Shopify today. This is Possibility, powered by Shopify. Sign up for a £1 per month trial period at shopify.co.uk/shift, all lowercase. Go to shopify.co.uk/shift to take your business to the next level today. That's shopify.co.uk/shift. The best children's books actually don't talk to children like they're children.
Yes.
And I think,
firmly believe that.
Well, Snow Angels is simple. It's not simplistic.
Well, you see, I always think about Beatrix Potter, whom I absolutely love, actually. She's very synonymous for some people with this kind of English pretty landscape and stories about bunnies. But actually, anyone who's read her properly, she's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. They're very deep, frightening stories that grapple with enormous themes of mortality and evil, good versus evil. And so, I think she's fantastic. But she is somebody who uses, the Flopsy Bunnies, I think, where she describes lettuce as having a soporific effect. That's an astonishing phrase, astonishing vocabulary to use in a children's book. But I read that as a child, and I don't know. I think children, if they don't necessarily understand it, they'll either skim over it. And they will
also, you
come
see the
back
picture
to
of the bunny going to sleep.
That's right. It's amazing chutzpah, really, to put that in a children's book. But brilliant chutzpah.
Yeah, well, I think you might have another winner. I can see it in the Christmas Day teatime animation slot, for sure.
Well, I was quite interested because I wanted to write a story about winter in a sense that's ecumenical. So I'm from, a kind of quite traditional Christian religious background, and my husband's Jewish, and so it's tricky, I've always found, to find books that do just talk about seasonal and winter and aren't particularly related to a religious festival like that. So I wanted to write something that was sort of slightly referring to it, but certainly not adhering to any kind of particular religious principle. But I think winter's a fascinating thing. Certainly in folklore, winter's a very dangerous time. It used to be dangerous. It still is, actually, particularly this year, I think. It's a time when your life could be in threat and your survival was under threat at certain places. So I was interested in that idea. But also I think, what really made me want to write it is that I found that there is... it's strange, there are so many picture books for sort of the under fives, in a sense, or under sixes, which grapple with huge themes. Like the Beatrix Potter, or like John Classen's book, I Want My Hat Back, or The Tiger Who Came to Tea. They're dark and they're strange and they you can read them on one level, but there's a whole other levels underneath that you can really see. I mean, I still remember reading I Want My Hat Back with my 2 or 3-year-old on my knee, and we turned the last page, and I remember looking at her thinking, does she realise what's happened? And she had a really long look at the last picture, and she said, did he eat the rabbit? That kind of, just the shock on her face.
Yeah,
but also the slight glee because the rabbit stole his hat, Did the rabbit deserve it? It's massive questions, huge questions, fascinating. But then the weird thing happens, I think, until you sort of reach, I don't know what age you'd need to be, maybe 10 or 11, and you get to maybe the Lemony Snickets and the Harry Potters and Narnia, and there's a kind of weird sort of drop-off in books that are about challenging themes. And I understand it because, I'm not saying there are none, but there is a weird sort of dearth in a strange way. And obviously it's probably around the age where children are going off and reading on their own, and you don't want perhaps you don't want children to be dealing with these things on their own. But I've always found it quite hard to find stories that build resilience, stories that challenge you for that age group. So I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll just try and write one.
And you've done it.
Well, I'm so lucky because I was paired with just this absolutely brilliant illustrator, Daniela Jaglenka-Terezzini, and she was absolutely my dream.
The pictures are beautiful.
They are amazing, aren't they? So my lockdown was illuminated once a fortnight with these things appearing in my inbox.
Oh, wow.
These images. And they're just so absolutely perfect. And she and I had quite long discussions back and forth about angels and what they look like and what our favourite angels were. I went to Rome last year and I was walking along the Ponte San Angelo, and there are these incredible sculptures of angels, some are by Bernini and other sculptures. So I was taking all these pictures and emailing them to Danielle saying, look at these, these are the angel. So she's done an absolutely incredible job. So it's the first time I've ever collaborated with anybody, which has been such a joy, actually, such a brilliant experience.
Could you imagine collaborating again?
I would love to. I'd love to, as long as... I think Daniela's probably a very busy woman, though. But no, I'd love to do another book with Daniela, if that's possible.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. So the podcast's called The Shift. What have been the big shifts in your life, the moments where there's been like a sea change?
God, so many. Certainly leaving home, I think, is the biggest one. I think illness is a huge shift. I think that's a kind of experience. Anybody who's been through any kind of severe illness will know that you go through it. It's a bit like walking through fire. You're sort of melted down in a sense, and you have to make yourself anew on the other side. You're the same elements and same atoms, but in a totally different shape, in a way. Giving up my day job, I remember that being a big thing, because I used to be a journalist. I remember giving up my kind of office day job at The Independent and deciding to be... it's not that I ever thought I'm going to be a writer. I just decided to go freelance and do a bit of writing on the side, because I wrote my first 2 books when I was still working full-time. I don't know, and having children, that's an enormous shift, I think, because your life is unrecognisable to you. The minute your first child takes, in my case, his first breath, life as you know it is gone, it's over. And something else has completely taken its place. I think certainly coming into what's called middle age, which is not a phrase I particularly like, but I think that's a big shift. And your children needing you less because I've got quite a big age gap in my kids. My eldest is 17 and my youngest is 8. I'm really lucky, actually, having had a long period with quite young kids in the house. Obviously an 8-year-old is a bit more, they still need you, obviously, but they're much less with you all the time, actually. So that's been a huge shift. But I think life is constantly, I don't know, one of my favourite books is Brideshead Revisited, and Evelyn Waugh says in it that change is the only sign of life. I'm a terribly restless person, so I kind of like change. I really need change. If I get bored, I like to kind of move the furniture around, or I like to, I need to constantly. That's why I like to wear different clothes every day.
You'd hate my clothes. They're literally the same thing over and over.
Yeah, but everyone, it obviously fulfills a need in you, I think. My husband wears the same clothes every day. That's the way, that what makes him happy. But I think all of us are different, sort of made up differently in that sense. But I really need a lot of novelty. I like things to change. And I absolutely love my house. I would never really want to move, but I do always think, what if I lived here? I came to your house and I thought, well, I could live here. I think I sort of like shifts. I like changes.
Do you think that change is built into women? Just like literally, biologically?
I suppose it is. It's very interesting watching my son go through adolescence, and I hate to generalise in this way about genders, certainly, but it's always seemed like a lot less of a big deal, I think it is, than I think it is for girls. I remember watching him when he was maybe, 13 or 14, and I thought he's never, ever going to have to get used to walking onto a bus and people staring at his body, or people commenting on him, or people, and how extraordinary that would be. Imagine, And I remember the first time it started happening to me, and I was probably 11 or 12, and I look at my 11 or 12-year-olds and I think, Jesus, they're children. What a moment for that to happen, and how horrifying that is. I remember being really frightened suddenly when you realise that your physical appearance is causing all this attention and all this unwanted attention and all these comments and looks, and very frightening, really frightening for young. I mean, they're children. I was on a tube a few years ago, and there was two quite young sort of blokes in their 20s I got on. They were very drunk, and they started hassling this child. I mean, she was probably 13, very beautiful girl. But I remember her mother was saying to them, please leave her alone. She's 13, please.
Oh God, her mother was there, and they were still hassling her.
And they were hassling her, and it was just so awful. And I remember coming home and looking at my daughters and thinking, oh my God, that's only 4 years away, and just feeling this kind of horror, thinking, oh God, how can it be? How can it be ahead of them? But I suppose we all adjust to it, and we all learn how to deal with it. But it's not a nice end of childhood, is it? And I do think boys don't necessarily have that. Perhaps
different, but
it's different. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying there are no pressures on young males, because of course there are. That would be a facetious thing to say, but different pressure.
One of the things that's really struck me, nearly everybody I've spoken to has said that they in no way miss the kind of male gaze shifting away from them.
No, such a relief, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, it is. Yeah, there's nothing about that I think, oh, wouldn't it still be nice if? No, there isn't. It's such a relief. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, it's very good to be off that radar.
When I was thinking earlier about questions and thinking about your social media and stuff, and you're are you 48 now?
Yes.
And you're, aside from the fact that you've just won this enormous prize, which may actually make you much more visible, you're at the point when, men do become into their prime and visible, and women tend to just nip over there and do something and don't bother us. Do you think you would regard the invisibility as kind of a gift or a problem?
I mean, it's funny, I don't think of women of that age as invisible at all, and I've heard other people say that, but I find it completely untrue. I mean, you think about Bernadine Evaristo, what's she, 60?
Yeah, she's 60.
61? 60?
60, yeah.
And Hilary Mantel, who's, in her 70s?
Yeah, I'm not sure, yeah.
Judi Dench, or I don't know, Kate Blanchett, are they invisible?
No, they're not.
There are women in all kinds of fields who are I don't like the phrase at the top of their game, but
yeah.
just flying high. I mean, perhaps what they mean is that kind of cessation of being sexualised, but to me that doesn't feel like invisibility.
No, that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing.
Well, depends on your perspective,
and I don't
but for
think
me
it
it's a good
depends
thing.
if that's the kind of thing that powers your batteries, and it certainly has never been mine. I suspect probably not yours or Bernadette Evaristo's or Hilary Mantel, and I think if that is the kind of thing which has powered your batteries, then just find a different way to recharge, because of course you're not. I mean, there's so much, I don't know, I find it quite exciting. I just, and I think that's partly why I really hate I don't really like the phrase middle-aged, but actually I don't like its sort of negative, pejorative connotations, because it seems to me that if it is your middle age, if you and I, Sam, are in the middle of our life, then God, we're really lucky.
Yeah, we've got a really long time to go.
We've got another half to go.
Wood.
And yes, exactly, quick, let's touch wood. If we are at our midpoint, then we're one of the lucky ones, because there are so many who aren't, and so many who are still not with us. And I don't know, I find it a fascinating thing, and it doesn't give me any problem at all. And I know for my husband is actually really deeply bothered about to be turning 50.
Oh, is he?
Yeah, which I find
that's really interesting.
Strange, isn't it? Really strange. And he finds it really bothers him that he can't play football anymore. Or, I mean, it's probably because he was sporty. I never was, and never would be. But and he finds the kind of physical signs of ageing really, really get to him, probably. I mean, it is annoying. I hate having to go and see a chiropractor with my back and
creaking when you get up.
I had to have an operation on my shoulder, and all. I mean, but it's just, God, it's better than the alternative, isn't it? Because what is the alternative?
Exactly.
It's not being here at all, and so many people aren't. And I think you've got to feel how lucky you are to have grey hairs and to be getting older. And and I heard someone recently, one of my friends was complaining about how her breasts look. And then another friend of mine said, well, at least you've still got your breasts, because I haven't. And I thought,
God.
But then she said it in a very, it wasn't aggressive, but I thought, well, too right, actually.
Yeah, that
Too
puts it in
right.
perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Make the most of them, even if they're not what they were. I mean,
Yeah.
Just be glad that they are
Yeah.
still there.
Yeah, it's the framing, isn't it, of aging as being about what you're losing, not what you're gaining.
Yeah, I mean, ageing is a very loaded word as well. I just think of it as just, we're still living.
Yeah.
And thank God for that. Long may it last.
Before I get to the kind of like the questions I always ask, I want to ask you a question about language and the way language is applied to older women when it is applied to older women. At the most basic level, you've kind of got the silver fox, although not Will, because he's not feeling very happy about it. And, women, the language is all very negative. I was interviewing a French woman and she said that the equivalent of old bag in French is old skin, literally old skin. And it's still only applied to women.
Yes.
Even though presumably men's skin is the same age.
Yeah.
And I just think when you start looking at the language that's used around women who are older, the language is all, crone and old this and
It's ridiculous,
old that.
isn't it?
I don't know, I just wondered, got any ideas?
Well, language, I mean, I think language in a sense is sort of out of our control, but also in our control. It depends whether we want to use it and whether we recognise it. I think of the word crone and I think that's an awful word and I would never use it for anyone. The other day when somebody was asking about the word spinster, which is a terrible word, isn't it? I mean, and there's no male equivalent, obviously, because bachelor is the equivalent, but that sounds quite racy, doesn't it? But actually, the sort of etymology of spinster is a woman who had no choice about how to make her living than to take in spinning. And so she probably was unmarried, but she could have been, her husband could have died, or she, there could be any kind of situation, but that's what it literally means, a woman who works for herself in the only way that she can and earns money and isn't dependent on anyone.
And in that sense, it's a perfectly decent word.
Yeah, it's perfectly decent. It's very respectable, and why not? Why shouldn't you? Maybe if you don't want to go and live with relatives, or become a drudge or become a maid of all work, maybe it's being a spinster was a good option for you.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you look at it like that.
Yeah,
it's like if you look back to the things that denoted a witch.
Oh God, yes.
They were all things that just basically denoted a middle-aged woman, probably menopausal.
Yeah. Possibly, yeah, exactly. A very wise woman I know who we were discussing the menopause, and she said, she's a bit older than me, and I really like her and I always take her advice, and she said, you've got to think about the menopause as an advantage. So because what happens to you when you're in your kind of fertile years is you're completely cyclical and your mind is going round and you're on this kind of cyclical treadmill from month to month. And she said, when you leave that, she said, you can start to think in this exciting linear way. You can look far forward into the future. She said you can achieve all kinds of things. She said you just get down off the cyclical treadmill.
I think she's really right. She sounds great.
She's amazing.
Yeah.
She probably would have been termed a witch.
Yeah, probably.
A long time ago.
Well, it's like the brilliant Fleabag quote, the Kristen Scott Thomas quote, where she says about basically how the menopause is shit and then it's wonderful because you're no longer tied to the biological cycles.
Yes. Okay, yes.
And I think there's a lot in it. It's the best scene. It's probably still the only scene I've seen where a woman of that age has been portrayed as interesting and
beautiful.
Hot and beautiful and smart and definite. Actually.
Yes, exactly. Happy in her skin.
Yeah.
Not old skin, beautiful skin.
Yeah, not old skin.
Yeah,
just skin. What would be your emotional age?
I don't know, probably ageless actually. I don't really think about age. Age isn't really that important to me. It's funny, I heard someone say, I really like this person. She said, but I'm much too old to be friends with her. And I thought, what? I mean, that's never occurred to me. There's a brilliant bit in Edward St. Aubyn's book, Mother's Milk, where the father is trying to encourage his son to have more friends his own age. And the son turns around to him and says, well, are all your friends 45? Which I think is so brilliant. And I always think of that. And I think it would be so weird if all my friends were 47 or 48. Yeah. I have one friend who, she, as a joke, she said she still thinks about school years. And she said, oh, well, she often says to me, but you would have been a year above me.
Yeah.
Which I find so funny at this stage in our lives. I don't know. I think in some ways I feel like very childish, in some ways I feel very old. I feel like one of those matryoshkas with all those selves. They're all just inside you and you can take them out sometimes, and sometimes you put them back and you can adapt. Maybe that's part of being a writer in a way.
I really like that image though.
Matryoshka dolls are fantastic. I love them. I'm certainly obsessed with them.
They're brilliant.
Yeah.
What is the book that you would force on people if you could recommend one book?
It's really hard. I mean, the book I I probably have reread most in my whole life is Jane Eyre, which I still really love, and I read it about once every 2 years or so. But I also gave my son recently The Outsider by Albert Camus, which I really think is wonderful. It's an incredible stylistic achievement, and also just getting under the skin of a character who's as strange and distant as that. But I don't know, so many. I really love the Canterbury Tales. That would be one. I think if I was about to be stranded on a desert island, I would take that. I think I would miss people's voices and conversation so much that I would.
Would that be your desert island book?
Possibly, yeah. And again, I would probably want some more, but I think I probably would, because there's so much in it and so much that can be, so many perspectives, and there's so many different things that he's packed into it.
Do you still do that thing where you discover a writer and then it's like, oh, they've written 10?
Yes. Oh God, it's such a thrill, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's like that moment when I always think, especially with female friendship, there is a point at which two women fall in love, and in a totally non-sexual way. And it's a bit like that feeling when you meet this woman and you think, God, you're fantastic. I think you're great. Let's go for a drink. And you know that you're going to be friends for a long time, and that's a really exciting moment. But it's a bit like that when you find somebody and you think, thank God they've got this amazing back catalogue.
Yeah.
To read.
That's what I'm doing. What advice would you give younger women?
I think to try and find some acceptance, particularly about your body. When I look back at my photos of myself now in my 20s, and I remember being miserable about it in certain ways and being harsh on myself. And I'm sure everybody says it. Says that brilliant bit which Nora Ephron says. I'm probably paraphrasing her very badly, where she said that she wishes she spent all her 20s wearing a bikini because she could. And I think, and it doesn't last. It doesn't last long. Time marches along a lot more quickly than you ever think it will.
When I think back to how much I've beaten myself up over the years about body image.
Yeah, it's mad, isn't it? So all that wasted energy.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Could have been doing anything.
Sometimes I look at myself and I do, of course, as everybody does, you look in the mirror and you think, oh God. But then, I don't know, you have to remember that when I'm, hopefully, if I reach this age, if I'm 60 or 70, I'm going to look back at photos of myself at 48 and think, what was I so worried about?
Yes, yeah.
You've got to remember that.
Yeah, it still applies.
Yeah, exactly. It's an ongoing process.
What would your superpower be?
I think a superpower I would like, is to be able to look at people and know the best way to help them, if somebody's upset. I think that would be a brilliant superpower to have, wouldn't it?
That's a little bit Agnes.
Perhaps it is, but that's the reason why I wrote her like that.
Who would your old bird role model be?
There's a writer, actually, she's been dead quite a long time, but she's called Isabella Lucy Bird. And
Oh, I've never heard of her.
Oh, she's quite something. As a teenager, she was told that she was very delicate and she needed to kind of basically stay lying on the sofa. And she hurt her back, and the doctor said, no, you really mustn't. You must lie down and rest. And she didn't. She travelled all over the world, actually, all over China and all over... I think she went to Mongolia, and then she had this whole book that she wrote all about the Rockies. And while she was in the Rockies, she married this kind of wild man who lived out in a hut. She just had this fantastic life, and I really love the idea that she got this diagnosis and just thought, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to go and travel all over the world at a time when women really didn't.
She sounds amazing. Where'd you hear about her?
I read her books years ago.
And lastly, how many fucks do you give?
Mostly 0 about a lot of things, but huge number about other things. I don't have any slogan t-shirts or sweatshirts at all. I don't really like them. I don't really like the idea. I think, your clothes should be by implication rather than literal. But I do have one that says, some things are not important.
Yeah.
So I wear it to do my yoga in. Because some things just really aren't.
Yeah.
And you should really give 0 fucks about any of those, but save all your fucks for something that really does matter.
That's really brilliant. That's a really good place to end. Thank you,
so
Maggie.
Much. Thank you. So.
Thank you for listening. I'd love to hear your feedback. You can reach me on Twitter at Sam Baker and Instagram at The Other Sam Baker using the hashtag #TheShift. You can hear a new episode of The Shift each week on Acast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you hear, please do rate and subscribe, because it really does help other people find us.
Unexplored catacombs buried beneath the city. A crumbling castle perched on a mountain peak. A top-secret government bunker. A cursed mansion cloaked in legend. I'm Sasha Auerbach. Join me and Tom Ward every Wednesday and Sunday as we reveal the mysteries and histories of abandoned places around the world and ask, where did everyone go? Brought to you by Like a Shot, makers of Forbidden History. Search for Where Did Everyone Go on your favorite podcast platform.